Right, welcome back. Of course, the discussion today is on the International Day for Care and Support, and basically focusing on investing in care for accelerated gender equality and sustainable development. Now, I want us to get more into the conversation, but now in studio I'm also joined by Maureen Otieno. She is the Gender Justice and Women's Rights Strategies at Oxfam. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me.
We were just discussing some bits of the report that just came out. Tell us your thoughts on this particular report. It's the first time that the time use survey is being used in Kenya.
And thank you very much. So first things is to really acknowledge the great work that has gone through this process of actually coming up and developing the Kenya Times report. And it's quite a great milestone for the country because it offers key gender statistics, especially around time poverty and around unpaid care and domestic work. Mm-hmm. And for this country, it contributes to a great journey, especially in regards to accelerating gender equality in the country and contributing to Sustainable Development Goals 5.41 on recognizing and valuing unpaid care and domestic work. Mm-hmm. And I feel that from this particular report, the government at county level, national and county level, and also private sector entities will have a great chance at really looking at the care landscape and what opportunities exist to invest in care. That is, of course, looking at the policy conversation, right, looking at budgetary allocations, and it's a very, very good report that really will shape history and the landscape and conversations around accelerating gender equality. Mm-hmm. And just to note that even as the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and other stakeholders, including UN Women and stakeholders such as the World Bank and other civil and society organizations have been in this journey, it's one journey that we must recognize that it will require a lot of buy-in sessions to further this work, because this is a social norms conversation. Right. It's a conversation around tradition and culture that we are really looking at transforming. So we cannot move away from the role of stakeholders, the role of community buy-in, and the role of each one of us in really furthering these discussions. I think this is a really great flagship project for this country.
Right, thank you for that. Oganga, I just want to bring you in now on the conversation about counties. One of the findings that I saw is that in the analysis, Marsabit County specifically recorded the highest proportion of time spent per day on unpaid domestic care. Why is that the case, and what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, yeah. I think looking at the counties across the northern frontier, you note that, for instance, Marsabit, where women spend around 30.2% in terms of the proportion of time, their time in a day. Mm-hmm. And this, I would look at it in terms of a number of factors. One of them is, of course, the existing gender norms, that where you find the responsibility of unpaid care and domestic work still, continues to be heavily, done by women. And again, the other thing is also with regards to the fact that when you look at also the socioeconomic activities, that most people, engage in across that region. One of them, like the very nature of their nomadic lifestyle or pastoralist kind of lifestyle. Yeah. In a way, you'll find that it is definitely the women who find themselves, left behind at home to be able to take care of those caregiving responsibilities, like looking after the children, and also, taking care of other, responsibilities around care work. And so this, I would really say that these are one of the areas that, through the evidence that KNBS has provided, that we really need to tackle by being able to come up with policies, to enable us to create an enabling environment, where in the long term, most of these women, when you look at also other indicators, you may also notice that, for instance, in education, you'll also notice that perhaps majority of the young women across that region are in a way also disadvantaged because of some of those kind of responsibilities. And so it's really an opportune time for the UN, of course, in this case, partly also with the non-state actors, to be able to work together to help the government to come up with a policy or a legislation that will be able to address some of these issues. And I would like to also mention that the UN Women has really been instrumental, both in terms of working closely with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, just to be able to generate more evidence in terms of gender statistics. And so even beyond the publication of this time survey report, we shall still continue to support the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics also to help us understand, like now the regions like Marsabit that you've mentioned, that what are some of these underlying factors that predispose women, to really, in those areas, to shoulder or that level of intensity of the unpaid work that some of these women undertake.
Right.
Yes.
Before we get into policy, now coming to you, Stanley, of course, from KNBS, the county analysis that we're talking about, for instance, Marsabit, what more can you tell us about?
Yeah, there is also the additional issue of the landscape of those areas. If it's not Marsabit alone, actually, if you the trends in the neighboring counties, the northern frontier, what used to be called the northern frontier districts, is more or less the same. That geography, the climate, and when we compare, for example, like some of these domestic tasks that we are talking about here, things like fetchy water, the area is dry, so you find water points are quite far apart. It aggravates that problem. And therefore, the areas that I think government will be looking into is, one, the finalization of the care policy, national care policy. It is started, it is in progress, and it's going to be enriched so much by the results of this survey. And in that policy development, we have 5 R's. I think my colleagues will be supplementing this. I'll speak about 1 or 2, then they supplement. And the first step is to recognize, care work to be work, and that the mere fact that the UN has set aside a day for care and support, for me, that is a good milestone, because it's going to bring a lot of limelight of the way the situation is. The coincidental release of these results, I think it came just 10 days, I think, before this day we are commemorating. I think it's also another good timing, in the sense that we have some hard facts, to show and demonstrate the disparities that are there. So that recognition, we go further, document it. These results document. And going forward, we intend to, even if we do not succeed, for example, like to gross them up into the GDP, but then we intend actually to do a further analysis and value the care work, and possibly document it in a satellite account. What the satellite accounts do, they quantify the value of a sector's work, so that we are able to know, let's say, for example, compare it to the GDP, what proportion does it contribute? Then secondly, government intends to take actions to reduce. Okay? One way of reducing, I think Madam Maureen had indicated, some of these services government can be able to invest to reduce the burden. For example, like the long hours taken to go and fetch water, firewood, whatnot. The government can put policies that can be able to assist to reduce. And it's not government alone. Even our partners, they are supporting that direction. And then the other one, which may take time and needs a lot of concerted effort and behavior change, attitudes, it's redistribution. Within the household level, that we want to encourage households and families, right, to distribute some of these things, so that more members of the household can participate and alleviate that one, all right? And I think my colleagues can also tackle the other
Yeah, Maureen, because I wanted to just come to you now, Maureen, and talk about now why it's very important to have that discussion in investing in care, and now what needs to be done.
Thank you very much. So I'll just circle back and add on to what my colleague Gumbua has mentioned. When you look at the drought situation in the country, we had the worst drought situation in decades. And when you look at Marsabit County, it's one of the counties that was greatly affected by drought. So Oxfam in Kenya has been working in the humanitarian response, and we have great flagship projects, especially in Marsabit County. And out of various interventions, we also got to appreciate that women actually were facing the worst brunt and effects of drought, especially from the Marsabit area, and also environs around the arid and semi-arid lands. And for that particular reason, you will note that of course, they will be spending more hours really in domestic roles because of the effects of drought. And we also need to also appreciate as we look at this particular report, how do we link the effects of climate change to gender? Because they contribute to the hours that women are spending, especially when we look at unpaid care and domestic work. So when we look at investing in care, of course, what we were looking at is commitment, really, as nationally appropriate by the government in infrastructure that is labor saving. All right, so we're looking at care labor saving infrastructure that really allows women to save on time, especially when it comes to issues related to access to water. That includes investing in water infrastructure, reducing the time that women are taking to get to water points, maybe in such locations. Secondly, when you talk about the investment, of course, we're talking about gender responsive budgeting, really having the national government and the county government really committing itself to gender responsive budgeting, ensuring that really allocation of resources takes into consideration such dynamics, such as the time spent by women, the needs of women, the concerns of women, especially when you look at different sectors, including water, including health. And that way we actually come up with what we call care essential infrastructure that takes into consideration the care needs and the care asks of women in those specific counties. And I feel also that investing in care also revolves around policies. And we talk about policies, of course, we're looking at policies around social protection. We bring in conversations on access to decent work, protection from abuses, especially in the line of work. So there's a major conversation that boils around budgetary allocation and also policy investment as a priority, so that we're able to really benefit from this report and have meaningful investment as we accelerate towards gender equality and sustainable development.
Right, thanks, Maureen, for that. Coming to you now, Ganga, what specific policies now would you like to see in place, especially here in Kenya, with regard to the report that's just come out? Yeah,
so I think just building on what my colleagues have already talked about, one is I'd like to mention that UN Women has been able to work closely with the National Bureau of Statistics and also the State Department for Gender to be able to, get to understand that before, beginning to formulate a policy, then what does the, care economy landscape look like by coming up with a national care policy roadmap. And so within the roadmap, the process is still going on, of course, and we've been able to help them to quantify and see that first, before we embark on policy formulation, what is the demand for care in the country, and also what is the existing or the current supply, by looking at the current expenditure by the national government and also the counties. In this case, I would want to mention, for instance, when you look at the care sector, we have the health, we have the education, and then we also have, the labor in terms of employment and related. And so when you look at then the policy areas that we'll then look forward to support the government in addressing, so that we are able to, consider that unpaid work informs the future of decent work. That then means that we then need to come up with policies around issues around labor policies, issues around social protection policies, like my colleague alluded to, issues around migration policies. And so with this, I'd like to call us to the 5R framework, which it's a policy framework developed by UN Women in collaboration with the International Labour Organization to support governments to come up with policies that help to then address some of the care issues by being able also to inform or develop some of the care supporting infrastructures by provision of public services and the like. And my colleague here already talked about the first 3 R's, which are mainly aligned around unpaid work. The recognition, and within the context of recognition, we also would like to be able to see that how can we be able to derive the economic value, to measure the economic value of unpaid work by supporting the National Statistics Office to incorporate this within the measurement of GDP, so that we're able to see what is the contribution of the unpaid work to the national GDP. The other thing, again, also with regards to the redistribution, which he also mentioned about, is when we are then able, to help reduce some of those, or shift the narratives around some of these gender norms, then we have then both men and women, girls and boys being able to take up some of those responsibilities. And so the knock-on effect then in this case is the reduction. And of course, without also forgetting that within the care sector, we also have the paid caregivers or the paid care workers, where we have the nurses, for instance, and even the teachers. Like if you look at the early childhood development, education, which has now been devolved to the counties. But then when you look at the education policy, with respect to early childhood development, it only focuses on children in the age of 4 to 5 years. So then what happens to those that are below 3 years? And so this is then where we then now seek to ensure that the State Department for Gender is able to come up with a national care policy that then would help to address some of those underlying issues that still affect the issue around gender equality and enabling women to be able to get empowered and get themselves out of still doing much of the unpaid work.
Right. Thanks for that. Stanley, is there anything you'd like to add on that before we wrap up? Yes.
I'm trying to project a situation where, for example, like when you look at the entire spectrum of your human life, from the time you are born, and maybe, God willing, you live up to those 80 years and above. For an infant who is, let's say, 1 day old, is 100% totally dependent on external care and support. The same scenario starts to play again for the higher ages, like 90 and above. And you find, for example, like at the lower age, the mother becomes really, the focal person there. We also find at the higher ages, or again, women also be, the same one also are taking care of them. And in all of these things is unpaid. And that's an area, for example, I think we'll be engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. We look, maybe, in Kenya, maybe we don't have sufficient resources, for example, like to be able to fully support and pay for care. But these services are very important. Human life is, in those scenarios, is such that we need to be able to alleviate the suffering. And the quality of care to children and also to the elderly is really dependent on the compensation aspect. Because you find, for example, like among poor households, the women are also contributors to the household income in one way or another. They are contributing. So there is a lot of, let's say, pressure and competition for the time for care. They may not even also be able to get sufficient time to care. And therefore, occasionally we find those individuals that are in utmost need of care, then they are likely to suffer. There are also scenarios like we found in the census that of a one member household, and is elderly. How do we take care of that kind of people? Can we, for example, think through arrangements where, for example, like maybe the state can be able to make provision for paid services or financial monetary compensation for those that take care of them, so that at least even if they don't get time to go and do some paid work, they have something they can be able to rely on for some basic needs. And I think those are areas that going forward we will encourage dialogue along that line.
Right, thanks. Maureen, just coming to you, earlier we were talking about stereotypes and how culture really plays a big role in this case, and even from where you sit, gender justice. What has been your experience like? What have you seen on the ground happening?
So interestingly, Oxfam last year conducted a study on narratives around care and unpaid care and domestic work. And one of the things that we noticed is that social norms play a very huge role when it comes to defining care, defining the roles and responsibilities that we assume. So you will note that, again, we'll ask ourselves, who taught me to be the woman that I am? It's a socially learned behavior. And you will note that what is socially learned in Marsabit will be different from what is socially learned in Kitui. It will be different from what is socially learned in Kilifi. So we noticed also as Oxfam that when it comes to advancing the care conversations, shifting narratives on care work becomes very, very important. And it's important that we do this in consultation with men. So male engagement becomes a very, very important perspective in really transforming care norms. And secondly, we also believe in communication. So the role of media, because media is really, really huge, plays a very huge role in terms of how they interpret some of these conversations that we have. So it was quite interesting to note that those are two key players and key actors that we cannot move away from working with. That is the media. We cannot really move away from working closely with men as agents of change, because we actually are a very patriarchal society, and there is need for us to come up with solutions that are indigenous to the Kenyan context and indigenous to the African setting, even as we move forward the conversations on care.
Right, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting and enlightening conversation.
Thank you.
Really, of course, that was a conversation on the Day for Care and Support, investing in care specifically. And in studio I was joined by Maureen Otieno. She's the Gender Justice and Women's Rights Strategist at Oxfam. Next to her is Oganga Cannibal. He is the Program Specialist, Gender Statistics Advisor, UN Women. And immediately next to me is Stanley Wambua. He's the Head of Gender Statistics at Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, that's a wrap for that conversation. Thank you for watching. My name is Fatia Mohammed. News is up next.
KTN News. Get the whole story.